Hi there, my name's Ian Ives. I'm the Sanctuary Director at the Mass Audubon Long Pasture Sanctuary in Comaquid. And I thought we'd have an opportunity today to give you some information about long pasture, the sorts of things that you might see and experience when you come visit the sanctuary. So at Mass Audubon, we're all about protecting nature for people and wildlife. And we want your experience to be enriched. We want you to have a little bit of information about what you're going to see when you come to the sanctuary. So one of the most important things that we do here is we manage our habitat. We're not just protecting it and then letting it be. We want to actively manage it. And I thought it would be fun to give you some examples of 4 different types of habitats that we are actively working with. One would be where we are right now, our open field habitat and our butterfly mosaic. Secondly would be our orchard habitat. Third would be our wetland habitat. And then last, our tidal flat and ocean habitat. So the first habitat that I wanted to talk about is the one that you'll see when you arrive here the first time. You'll come down to this open field here, in and amongst all the goldenrod, and you might stumble across a sign that says Butterfly Mosaic. This is a trail or a mosaic of 10 different plots. Each one is designed to have a connection to pollinators. So when you garden at your home, think about the sorts of things that you might be able to plant that can benefit not only yourself as a person, but wildlife as well. The goal of our Butterfly Mosaic Trail is to help butterflies and people. We want to interpret, we want people to be able to understand the sorts of wildlife around them and how that they can attract that wildlife to their own yards. It's wonderful to have hydrangeas and cultivated plants in your yard, but if you really want to attract wildlife and biodiversity and help the environment, you want to be planting things that are tied and connected to our pollinators. So for example, Joe Pye weed. This is a beautiful plant that grows really readily in all sorts of different Cape Cod habitats. And it's a great source for nectar and pollen for all sorts of pollinators. So what's a pollinator? Well, it can be a butterfly, it can be bees, it can be birds, it can be a whole variety of different insects. There's a huge host of pollinators out there that are the building blocks for our different habitats here on Cape Cod. So some of the plants that you might consider planting would be wild lupine, wild indigo, other native plants that are designed to grow in your particular region. And each pollinator, each type of animal that utilizes these plants has very specific adaptations that allow it to take advantage of the plants, right? So the length of the nose on a certain bee will indicate what kind of flowers it's able to collect nectar from, for example. So on this particular plot, we've got a whole host of different plants that are designed to host, we call it, to host certain types of butterflies. We have 9 other plots along the trail that are designed to be the host for different types of butterflies, all with the intent of kind of creating a buffet for all the types of pollinators that we have here at the sanctuary. So one of the most important pollinators that you can attract to your yard and we attract at Long Pasture are insects. If you take a look at this blue anise here, you can see a whole variety of bees, most of them are bumblebees, that are actively looking for nectar. So these insects have evolved adaptations to take advantage of the plants that they have around them. And bees will be doing 2 things when you see them on a flower. They'll be looking for nectar, collecting nectar, or they'll be collecting pollen. And the way you can tell the difference is by the activity that they're doing. If you look at this bumblebee down here, he's probing in with his proboscis into each individual flower. If they're probing with their head into the flower, then they're collecting nectar. And the nectar is their food. On the other hand, if they're buzzing around, hurriedly buzzing around the flower, shaking really quickly, then they're actually collecting pollen. And it's the pollen that they use for reproduction. So all of these bumbles right here are looking for nectar because they're probing into the flower. And now, the lengths of these mouth parts on the bees varies. So not every bee can collect nectar from every flower. They specialize. So what you want to do when you're planting is provide a whole host of different types of shaped flowers. Some that require a bee with a long nose and some that might require a bee with a short nose. That way you'll get the full biodiversity. in your yard. One of Mass Audubon's top priorities in managing its properties is to try to enhance biodiversity whenever possible. And here in the open fields at Long Pasture, we've got a lot of it. So we're standing now in an edge habitat. We're standing in a spot that we call early successional habitat. So if you look, it's kind of the edge of the forest and the edge of the field. It's where those two things meet. Sort of a spot where you'll see a huge variety of wildlife taking advantage of that edge, the dynamics that two different types of habitats bring together when they meet. And so we've got some cardinal flower, we've got just past flowering here is a little bit of marsh mallow, we've got bayberry, which is a huge source of energy and the fruits that are supplied at this time of year for migrating swallows. And then we've got a restored wetland down in here as well. We like to restore habitat to the prior fully functional, rich biodiversity attributes, and that's what we've done in here. A lot of different species of plants grow at Long Pasture. Many of them are non-native because once the farmers left our region, they made these rich, open, fallow landscapes that were rife for invasive plants. Luckily at Long Pasture, we've got a lot of different types of invasive plants. So again, if you're talking about biodiversity, even if they're invasive and you've got a lot of species richness, then you're helping a lot of different animals. So here at Long Pasture, when Mass Audubon acquired the land, farming was just wrapping up its operations. And the farmers did a large amount of clearing here at the sanctuary and had a huge impact on the habitat. Once you protect land, you can't just let it be, because a lot of the land that we're protecting has undergone a lot of development, a lot of changes that have impacted the integrity of it. So at Mass Audubon, we spend a lot of time rehabilitating the land or restoring the land. And what you're looking at here is a groundwater wetland that was drained or ditched by farmers back in the early 1900s in order to farm. It was in the way. We were able to identify this as a wetland, and using updated technology, we were able to create or restore this as native habitat. So what you're looking at is a wetland that was built by hand with a large excavator 6 years ago. And everything that's in this wetland has grown in on its own. Sort of a build it and they will come. And wetland habitat is by far the most valuable habitat that there is. Huge amount of biodiversity. Lots of different plants and animals will utilize this habitat. But we were focusing on one specific type of organism here. It's called a spadefoot toad, which is the state's rarest frog. And the spadefoot toad lives out on Sandy Neck Barrier Beach, where its final remaining stronghold exists in the state. And we've been working with local schools to translocate that spadefoot from Sandy Neck back to Long Pasture where it used to live. So this wetland here is designed to meet the needs of the spadefoot toad. And over time, we're hoping that we'll be able to repopulate this population of toads here at Long Pasture using these restored wetlands that we've built. This is one of 6 restored wetlands at Long Pasture that we've built in the last 6 years. So another habitat that we like to share with everybody at Long Pasture is our orchard habitat. We're standing in the middle of a little orchard here that was planted by the previous owner of the property, Sherman Parker. And it includes apple trees and some pear trees and a peach tree behind me. We have bees in the orchard. We have the European honeybees, which are great for pollinating. And then behind me, we have a brand new garden that we call the food forest. And the food forest is sort of a form of permaculture. Very similar to the restoration we're doing in the fields and the restoration work we did in our wetlands, we're doing here in the orchard, with the hopes of creating a sustainable type of agriculture, an interpretive exhibit, if you will. So next year, we're going to be expanding this garden by incorporating a footpath through the middle of it and some more interpretive information. What we'd like to do is share with you different types of native legacy plants that you're not very familiar with, perhaps, that you can incorporate into your own garden. So things like persimmon and pawpaw and a variety of other natives that can grow really well here on Cape Cod, but are a legacy plant, not something that you're going to see much of. The concept is that we're creating an orchard habitat that benefits a certain type of, or a certain suite of organisms that might be different than the suite of organisms that are taking advantage of an open field or a forest or a tidal flat and salt marsh habitat. So standing here in front of our food forest garden, it's a great opportunity to let you know about some of the opportunities in volunteering with Mass Audubon. All the different habitats that we've walked through today have opportunities for ecological management. And this is our food forest garden here. And here we always need volunteers to help us with transplanting and watering and weeding and helping us design this brand new exhibit. Similarly, out on the fields in our butterfly mosaic, we have 10 plots, 10 different gardens, and we need help all summer long tending those gardens. So if you're a master gardener, you have a passion about learning about native gardening, you're into pollinators, you love butterflies, it's a perfect opportunity to get involved. We also have opportunities to volunteer with our programs. You can be a program leader assistant, and we have a lot of needs in our visitor services department. Especially in the summer months when we have hundreds of people come into the sanctuary, we need visitor services staff to meet and greet and inform people. So there's a lot of ways you can get involved as a volunteer at Long Pasture. So here we are. It's probably the most beloved feature on the sanctuary, the tidal flats and Barnstable Harbor and Sandy Neck Barrier Beach in the background here. This is a wonderful habitat that belongs to everybody. The town of Barnstable owns all of Sandy Neck Barrier Beach and manages and owns the harbor as well. And Mass Audubon owns this small sliver of salt marsh and tidal flats here along Long Pasture's edge. And if you look down behind me, you can see this ribbon of salt marsh. This is just a little prelude into what lies beyond, way to the west of us, which is the heart of the Barnstable Great Marsh. And the Barnstable Great Marsh is the largest salt marsh on Cape Cod. It's actually the second largest salt marsh in Massachusetts. And it was created thousands of years ago as Sandy Neck Barrier Beach started to grow outward to the east. And in doing so, it created this lagoon that allowed the salt marsh to establish. So over the years, the salt marsh has been growing and expanding outward to the east as Sandy Neck Barrier Beach grows and expands outward to the east. What's interesting is as our climate changes, glaciers melt and sea level rises, we're going to start to see a change where the salt marsh begins to retreat. So more water in Barnstable Harbor, less salt marsh in Barnstable Harbor as we move ahead. These little interpretive panels here are interesting. They represent the average high tide prospectus for 2030, and then the average high tide perspective for 2050. Currently, the average high tide is at the end of the boardwalk, about 30 feet down off my fingertip. So we're going to see a lot of change, and as a result of sea level change, we're going to see the salt marsh have to retreat. So what are the things that we can do to help protect our salt marsh, which is hugely valuable in terms of protecting us from storms and pollution and erosion? We're going to need to understand what the vulnerabilities are. So right now, Mass Audubon is doing these vulnerability assessments across the state, looking at our coastal habitats to determine what are the biggest risks due to sea level rise and what can we do to prevent them. Some of the things that we can think about doing that are already being done is to armor our shoreline with natural armor. Things like living shorelines, we call them. Those could be reefs, such as oyster reefs. They could be artificial reefs. If you look out, you can see oyster aquaculture grant out there on the tidal flats. Back in the day when there were thousands and thousands of acres of oyster reefs growing along our shorelines, they created a natural resistance to storms. And they also were amazing habitat for all sorts of animals, and they protected us from pollution and from surges, storm surges. Today we don't have any of those natural oyster reefs anymore, and we rely on humans to restore the habitat. So over the upcoming years, we're going to be seeing a lot of this natural armament, living shorelines, being designed to help protect us from sea level rise.
So when you are looking for them on the beach, when they pull themselves up from the high tide so that they can lay their eggs up in this area. One of the things you can find is the edge of the carapace will leave these two lines from the sides right here. And then there'd be a line in the middle where the tail is dragging behind. And then you would see these tread marks from the walking legs. So it looks like a tractor trailer or something like that has been walking along the beach. And the babies are exactly the same, just shrunken down. Same exact body parts, just a smaller version. So it looks like somebody's been using matchbox cars on the beach. And you can find the baby horseshoe crabs that way. And they make these beautiful swirls sometimes when the female is dragging the male around to come into the nest. And then they'll lay their eggs, and they lay about 80,000 eggs during the low tide. And the female will have a male attached on the back, and she'll pull him around. And he hangs on for about a week before they lay their eggs. And he doesn't help to swim, and he doesn't help to get food or anything. It's just the female pulls him up onto the beach. Males are going to be typically smaller, females are bigger. Females would be bigger because she's full of eggs. She would be packed filled with eggs, so she'd have to have more room to carry that around.
So here we are at the site of the new Discovery Center here at Long Pasture. This is Sherman Parker's home that has been our visitor center for 15 years, starting in 2006. We have outgrown Sherman's home, and we are desperately in need of a professional, upgraded, fully accessible Discovery Center, Nature Center. And so this is the foundation in front of me. This is going to be about 1,600 square feet in size. It's going to be our new meet and greet reception room with our exhibits. It's going to have a multifunctional program space that can be dividable, can accommodate upwards of 90 people at a time. It's going to triple the size of our program space. So Sherman Parker's home was fine for about 5 years, but we've really outgrown what it has to offer. It's a home trying to be a visitor center. This new Discovery Center is really going to be a true professional upgraded facility for us. And one of the things that we have learned from COVID is there is great opportunity to bring our programming outdoors. So we're going to incorporate some outdoor features as part of our campus here. Some breakout spaces so that when programs, whether they're school programs or adult nature field study programs, can go from indoor of the classroom out easily. So we're thinking of having some breakout spaces that would be covered by some awnings, some sail awnings. We're looking to have a second phase of this project where we're going to build a small 3-season pavilion that could maybe accommodate an additional 50 people, have some outdoor storage. So any way that we can connect people outdoors as part of our lessons, we're going to try to incorporate it. So this project is slated to be completed in spring of 2021. It's a $1.7 million comprehensive package that's going to include not only the creation of this new Discovery Center and some brand new updated landscaping on our campus, but it's also going to provide an endowment as well as a current use fund to pay for our staff and to make Long Pasture sustainable down into the future. To date, we've raised all but $50,000 of our $1.7 million goal. So we can taste the finish line. We're finishing up this August and early September. And as you can see, we've already begun the construction. So there's still time to give, and all gifts at this time of year will be doubled through a generous matching challenge. So if you'd like to give 100, you'll give 200. Anyone that gives $1,000 or more can be featured on our plaque. You can get your name on our Discovery Center plaque. So come by and see all the activity. There's a lot happening. Really feels good during the time of COVID to be moving forward with this construction and this new project. And we're all hoping that next spring we'll be pushing the reset button and be through the pandemic and able to get back out and do our hands-on education work here at Long Pasture. Thanks, everybody.